Uh, Good evening, everyone. Today's topic is venous pathophysiology. Introduction. Venous diseases represent a major concern in the general population, they are influenced by genetic, environmental, and acquired conditions, essential for designing effective and safe therapies. So we'll see about the endothelium. Endothelium is the inner lining of all the blood vessels in the body. It covers a surface area of 5,000 square meters. It's a primary determinant of pathophysiology, and it's a target for collateral damage in most of the disease processes. It's a critical role in balancing the procoagulant and the anticoagulant mechanisms. It's involved in mediating chemostasis. Homeostasis. Endothelial cells also, in normal conditions, maintain a vasodilatory and a local fibrinolytic state. Non-thrombogenic endothelial surface is maintained by thrombomodulin and activated in C, heparin and dermatan sulfate, tissue factor pathway inhibitor, tissue plasminogen activator, and urokinase type plasminogen activator. Biomechanics. 70% of the circulating blood volume is stored in the veins and the venules in the body. Veins are the large capacitance vessels, essential for filling up the heart, and they compensate for orthostatic changes. Average venous pressure at the foot is 100 mm mercury, and pressure drops during ambulation and recurrence. Veins also undergo alteration in shape depending on the blood volume, being anywhere from 1/3 to 1/10 as thick as of the systemic arteries. Venous media is almost exclusively a muscular layer. Venules have no venules. Venules, that is the portion of the anatomy distal to the capillaries, have no media and no smooth muscle. Major part of the walls of the larger veins is composed of adventitia. In larger veins, it's mostly composed of adventitia. Vein wall have more smooth muscle and elastin content. Unlike arteries have more collagen content. So because of this, veins have high distensibility and have a high breaking pressure compared to arteries. Vein wall compliance decreases after thrombosis. It's because of the increased collagen deposition and disrupted elastin. So vein wall inflammation forms important part of the pathogenesis in DVT and superficial. And von Willebrand factor is expressed more in the endothelium of the veins compared to arteries. And systemic inflammation anywhere in the body causes endothelial activation, resulting in increased cell adhesion molecules, including P-selectin, E-selectin, and ICAP. All these promotes adhesion and activation of platelets. Valve is the important characteristic of a vein. The distribution and the number of venous valve depends on the area in which the maximum gravity is present. The place where gravity is more, the force of the gravity is more, those places tend to have more number of valves. And a valve is a bicuspid structure with a connective tissue skeleton enveloped by endothelium. The major function of venous valve is to divide the column of blood into segments and to ensure antegrade flow and prevent reflex from the deep to the superficial veins. So major function of valve is to ensure antegrade flow and to prevent reflex from deep to the superficial veins. So from superficial to deep points only the direction flows. There are more valves in the lower limb, which gradually reduces in number when we go proximally. Valves work in a 4-phase cycle, theoretically, opening, equilibrium, closing, and close. Foot and calf muscle pumps act in unison during walking to assist in venous return. There's a calf muscle pump, and similarly, there is a foot muscle pump also. These two act in unison. Because of that, the hydrostatic pressure in the upright position during walking reduces. All this needs an intact valvular system. Without an intact valvular system, results in an ambulatory venous hypertension. Deep venous thrombosis is a significant healthcare problem in the world. Virchow's triad forms a major component in the etiology. So stasis, vessel valve injury, and hypercoagulability state all can be the reasons. And recent studies show that stasis is probably only permissive and not a direct cause. And systemic inflammation may be more causal. If we go into the coagulation system can be broadly classified into extrinsic pathway, intrinsic, common pathway. Extrinsic pathway is activated by tissue factor from the endothelium, because of an external injury, and intrinsic pathway can be by exposed endothelial collagen when there is an endothelial injury. So other pathways which include protein C pathway and the fibrinolytic system, which we will see later. So hemostasis is initiated by vessel wall damage and endothelial disruption via extrinsic pathway. Variation occur, the coagulation cascade varies from area to area. For example, hemostasis in the cardiac muscle is more dependent on extrinsic pathway, and hemostasis in skeletal muscle is more dependent on intrinsic pathway. So this is the coagulation cascade. You can see intrinsic pathway, extrinsic pathway. Extrinsic pathway is because of some vessel is released that causes factor 7 release. So in turn they connect to the common pathway. Similarly, intrinsic pathway is when there is factors involved are 11, 9 and 8. So the common pathway is the factors involved are 10 and 5. So thrombin forms the major component of the common pathway, and the thrombin converts fibrinogen to fibrin, and the fibrin and there is cross-linking of fibrin because of factor 13, and this is grossly the coagulation cascade. And there is also the protein C pathway. Protein C pathway happens when protein C combines with the thrombomorph, and in the presence of cofactor of protein S, it activates activated protein C. This activated protein C inhibits factor 5 and factor 8. So because of that, the coagulation pathway is in. So when there is a, we'll see later, coagulation system as we saw. So the common pathway, the main component is thrombin and fibrin and the cross-linking of fibrin. All these are important. Here we can see the protein C pathway and the tissue plasminogen activator. The plasmin is a fibrinolytic enzyme. Plasminogen is converted to plasmin by the tissue plasminogen activator. This plasmin cross-linked fibrin strands and breaks them into fibrin products or the D-dimer. Central to the coagulation, just a view about the thrombin. It converts fibrin in the cross-linking of the fibrin, and as I said before, it activates the factor 13, which is the fibrin stabilizing factor, and also activates fibronectin and all. It shows resistance to, and because of that, there is resistance to thrombolysis. Thought to exist physiologically. One is the tissue factor, the other is the endothelial injury because of exposure of the subendothelium. Various molecules are involved, including glycoprotein 6, 1 millibrand factor, GP2B3A, and fibrin. All these play a role in the platelet aggregation, and the platelet granules are released. These granules have receptors for factor 5 and factor 8. So activated platelets also release thromboxane A2, which promotes platelet aggregation. Platelets are involved in the coagulation in the hemostasis. Platelet chain. Because of that, they expose negatively charged phospholipids. The platelets are exposed outside. So with these phospholipids are procoagulant because they also have a role in that coagulation pathway. So platelets also release microparticles, which are small particles in the platelets, which are rich in tissue factor, and they also activate concentration of the thrombus. So tissue factor is maybe more important in venous thrombosis than in arterial thrombosis. There are some natural anticoagulants in the body, which include thrombin, activated protein C, and tissue factor pathway inhibitor. Antithrombin, activated protein C we have seen already. Tissue factor pathway inhibitor also we have seen. Antithrombin is the central anticoagulant protein that binds to thrombin and interferes with coagulation by three major mechanisms. So whatever job thrombin does, this antithrombin inhibits all that. It inhibits fibrinogen conversion to fibrin, inhibits factor 5 and factor 8. And aggregation. So as we know, heparin activates antithrombin 3, which results in systemic anticoagulation. Antithrombin also has direct inhibitory effects on all these factors 7, 9, 10, 11, and 12. So when there is a genetic deficiency of antithrombin, there is a much higher risk of development of venous thromboembolism. Protein C, we have seen already, is a natural anticoagulant produced on the surface of intact epithelium when thrombin combines with thrombomodulator. In presence of cofactors inactivate 5A and 8A. Tissue factor pathway inhibitor is again an anticoagulant natural. It binds to tissue factor and factor 7A complex, thus inhibiting the activation of factor 10 to factor 10A. So thrombolysis, physiological thrombolysis is controlled. Pathological intravascular thrombolysis. So plasmid, as we saw earlier, major part of the central fibrinolytic system. It's plasminogen. So substrate include fibrin, fibrinogen, and other fibrinogen factors. So, as you saw, plasmid breaks down this cross-link fibrin polymers and and urokinase like an activator converts plasminogen to plasmid. These three plasminogen activator inhibitor, which is also found in the body. Fibrin integration it's a breakdown of cross-linked fibrin. So detection of D-dimer is a marker for ongoing thrombus metabolism. It has been shown risk of venous thromboembolism. The D-dimer value varies up to have fibrinolytic activity in soleal sinuses as well as in the popliteal and femoral region. Soleal sinuses fibrinolytic activity is less compared to the other regions. Maybe this is because maybe the reason why this is common. Inhibitor we have seen. Inhibitor, there is a genetic polymerism. It increases the risk of venous thromboembolism. Inhibitor levels are elevated in hyperlipidemia and factor V leader mutation. This is the plasminogen inhibitor. So DV multi. There is pro-coagulant versus anticoagulant forces they act together. Then there is a thrombosis. There can be injury and inflammation. The elevation of selectivity when compared with clinical examination in a patient activity, positive predictive value for diagnosing DVT exceeds than that of D-dimer. When P-selectin is combined with the clinical examination, then the positive predictive value for diagnosing DVT exceeds that of D-dimer. Inflammation and thrombosis. This inflammation increases tissue factor, fibrinogen, and the reactivity of platelets. And because of all this, microparticles are shed from platelets. As I said before, microparticles are pro-thrombotic. So platelet microparticles are associated with venous thrombosis. And GAL3BP is a binding protein. GAL3 binding protein was found to be upregulated in microparticle DVT. So GAL3 could be a potential marker in patients with acute DVT. So resolution in a patient with DVT is complex. It's involved, polymorpho-neutrophils are involved, other hypoxia inducible factor and VEG also has a role. And because of all this, and there is reduced vein wall contractility. Because vein wall contractility, there is an abnormality in the vein wall structure. Because of that, there is vein wall fibrosis, and there can be loss of venous endothelium. Because of loss of venous endothelium, there is predisposition for recurrent syndrome occurs in 20 to 50% of patients developing DVT. That results in chronic venous insufficiency. Then an outflow obstruction and a valvular reflex may be seen. When both are seen, then post-thrombotic syndrome, the clinical scenario, the grade is higher. So preservation of valve function is better with early resolution of thrombus. This can by catheter crucial and deep venous reflex happens, and ipsilateral recurrent DVT, multi-segment involvement, and popliteal vein involvement increases post-thrombotic syndrome. Ipsilateral recurrent DVT, multi-segment involvement of the vein, and popliteal vein involvement, all these increases risk of prothrombotic syndrome. So varicose veins, the varicose veins can affect any part of the axial veins are more affected because of upright nature of the tumors. By definition, it is more than 3 mm. It can be primary or etiology are there, and genetic predisposition is also an etiology. Spontaneous remission occurs when there is pregnancy. And in patients with varicose vein, there is expression of the collagen type 1 and type 3. And because of the vein wall abnormality, there is decreased contractual response of these veins to vasoconstrictors. So these veins are over-distended, and there is persistent vein wall tension. Thrombophlebitis, it's a venous wall inflammation associated with thrombus. It's usually sterile and is associated with thrombus. Again, it's because of inflammation, migration of polymorpho-neutrophils, and the thrombosis. Complex pathway involved, and the superficial venous system is affected. And the clinical scenario, we know, it's a pain, redness, swelling, and tenderness. After venous stripping and endovenous ablation. In pancreatic cancer, this migratory thrombophlebitis can be a marker, clinical marker that should not be missed. And in the CA breast, Mondor's disease, that is veins of the upper outer quadrant area, can be affected with thrombophlebitis. Venous system below knee is very important because it is area of the greatest interest. Most common site of venous soleal sinuses are also found below here, and the region of the leg where the complications of post-thrombotic syndrome are evident in below knee. Soleal sinuses, or veins of the soleal muscles, are called the soleal sinuses. Soleus muscle is known as a peripheral heart, as you know. It's a capacious size, and lack of venous valves. Soleal sinuses do not have venous valves, and it is the most common site for development of venous thrombosis. As I said before, these sinuses have less fibrinolytic activity. We'll see a bit about perforators. These are veins that carry blood from the superficial to the deep veins. They are short channels. They penetrate deep fascia. They also contain valves. They are found predominantly below the knee. A majority are small and inconstant in location. They are inconstant in location. They are varying, and they vary in number from 90 to 200. Most of the general population, there is a constant aspect of the distal thigh between the GSV and the deep system. And there are another 4 constant perforators in the leg, which connect to the posterior arch vein. They form important source of pathology in post-thrombotic syndrome. These constant perforators, which are in the lower part of the leg, the lower 2 perforators are present in the gaiter area. So these 4 perforators, they are in the posterior arch vein to the deep vein. The flow rate in vein is is variable. It varies from high flow to near complete stasis. So to measure the flow state, we have to measure the venous pressure. This indirect measurements can only be done by measurement of venous pressure and relate these two specific conditions. The pressure in absence of pulsatile flow in artery and vein in erect position will be equal in standing position up to the 0 point. So if we see, if a dead person is made to stand, and if we see the pressure up to the 0 point, that both the pressure in the artery and the vein will be equal. But in a live person, the 0 point is called differently. It's called hydrostatic indifferent point, which is just below the diaphragm in a erect person. This in the supine position, this hydrostatic indifferent point is in the right atrium, or it is at the level of fourth intercostal space. So arteriovenous pressure gradient in the foot remains the same in capillaries in supine and erect position. On standing, there is translocation of 500 ml of blood, that is 10% of the blood, into the lower limb on standing. So because of that, there is increase in the transmural venous pressure at the foot as a result of gravity. Because of this, extravasation of fluid from the capillaries into the tissues. That is compensated mostly by the lymphatics. So as I said before, this is the 0 point below which the pressures in the artery and the vein are same. In a normal person, the hydrostatic indifferent point is just below the diaphragm here, and in a supine position, it is just at the level of the right atrium. But the arteriovenous pressure gradient is both the same in the supine and it is around 80. If you see between 95 and 12, it is same, the arteriovenous pressure gradient. And here between 187 and 104, if you see, again it is the same. So the pressure gradient is maintained. The single most important element in preventing the continued accumulation of interstitial fluid is the calf muscle pump. The calf muscle pump is called the peripheral artery, as I told before. This can dramatically lower the pressure in the veins and the capillaries. So when we walk, when there is an intact calf pump and there is an intact valvular system in the veins, the venous pressure in the GSV decreases. When the calf pump or the valvular system is not intact, then there is ambulatory venous hypertension on walking. Saphenous venous pressure during a single step starts from the ground, it slightly increases and falls down, goes down below, and then again comes back and again goes up. So this happens because of the intact calf muscle pump. When in the standing position, the pressure, venous pressure is 80 to 100 in that range. But when we walk, when there is an intact calf muscle pump and when the valvular system is normal, the pressure decreases. But in the varicose vein, and when there is a valvular abnormality, when on walking, and there is ambulatory venous hypertension. In a normal person, cough volume decreases initially and increases arterial blood flow. It decreases initially, again increases because of the arterial blood flow. But in a varicose vein, the cough volume does not become that low and comes back to normal faster. In a patient, this is a picture showing the cough volume. Here we can see the cough volume does not go much and it stays like the same, it's status quo. In a normal individual, because of the intact cough muscle pump, the cough muscle pump empties the local venous system during contraction. With relaxation, the veins are nearly empty and the venous pressure is very low. this I have discussed already. Varicose vein patient, pressure does not fall to normal levels and it returns to pre-existing. Because of it, there is ambulatory venous hypertension. You can see the then again goes back during relaxation of the calf muscle. But here it remains the same in varicose vein. The side of the circulation is influenced by a variety of factors, which include pressure of the right heart, body position, muscle pump, and the amount of arterial flow. In the normal femoral vein, the flow velocity is lowest at the peak inspiration. A cough and a maneuver results in sharp increase in pressure above the valve. A cough and a Valsalva maneuver result in sharp increase in pressure above the valve, but not below it. This is the flow velocity in the common femoral artery. You can see the normal triphasic flow. Velocity in the common femoral vein in the supine position. Here we can see the phasic variation in the common femoral vein. In this picture depicts the effect of cough and the valve on the venous pressure above and below the valve in the deep vein. Here we can see when there is a cough and the Valsalva maneuver, when we see the pressure above the valve, there is a sharp increase. But when the valve is intact below the valve, there's slight increase, but it's not very significant. Now we will see about the abnormal pressure and flow relationship. The most common manifestation of abnormal venous function are primary varicose veins and post-thrombotic syndrome. Current evidence suggests that primary varicose veins can be familial. The initial abnormality in this condition appears to be incompetence of the terminal valves of the great and small saphenous system, which permits reflex of blood. With passage of time, progressive incompetence of the other valves occur. Venous flow in the incompetent GSV and is shown in this diagram. We can see in the position. This is the flow to antegrade flow towards the head. This is the retrograde flow towards the foot. In supine position, we can see both antegrade and the retrograde flow in an incompetent valvular system in GSV. Again, in position, again there is antegrade flow and the retrograde flow. During walking, we can see there is both antegrade and retrograde flow, meaning that significant reflex. So, when the pressure in the varicose ankle GSV was seen in 4 subgroup of patients, it was seen. A is a patient with no ulcer but only varicose vein. B is a patient with no ulcer and incompetent ankle perforator. And C is a patient with ulcer. And D is a patient with ulcer and incompetent perforator. So when we compare the 4 subset of patients, we can see the venous pressure in the GSV is more in the maximum in the ulcer with incompetent perforator patients. Ulcer, incompetent perforator, and abnormal deep vein patient in this group D. So because of this, there is increased ambulatory venous hypertension. These 4 peaks are the 4 steps taken by the patient during the measurement of the venous pressure. So this is normal value expected. This dark line is the abnormal venous hypertension. Venous insufficiency is a condition that affects the venous system of the lower limb, resulting in pain, skin changes, and ulceration. There is vein wall weakness and abnormality and valvular incompetence. Superficial veins get engorged and secondary valvular incompetence also happens. There is alteration in the collagen deposition in the veins, which may result in the weakness and the decreased elasticity of the vessels. The abnormalities caused by chronic insufficiency can also be seen in venous microcirculation. In venous microcirculation, as we saw already, capillaries become elongated and dilated, and there is widening of the endothelial surfaces, and because of that, there is extravasation of the fluid because of the increased pressure in the GSV, and because of that, there is edema. And because of edema, because of the edema, and there is also chronic dermal inflammation that occurs secondary due to the venous hypertension. Because of this inflammatory response from the interstitium, and the clinically it presents as a stasis dermatitis or a brawny induration or skin thickening, and there is tissue breakdown with ulceration in the gaiter area. All this is up to stasis dermatitis. So, and the next stage is venous ulcer. Venous ulcer, there are some theories. This is fibrin cuff theory. When there is extravasation of the fluid through the leaky endothelium, the fibrin cuff is formed around the capillary vessels. Because of that, because of the fibrin cuff, the decreased diffusion of gases and nutrients to the tissues, peripheral tissues happens. Because of the hypoxia, there is vulnerability of skin breach and there is risk of ulcer. And another theory which was proposed is white cell trap theory, trapped in the capillaries. And when these WBCs get trapped in the capillaries, there is release of toxic oxygen metabolites and proteolytic enzymes. These enzymes activate the inflammatory system and cause destruction of the tissues. Proteolytic enzymes cause destruction of the tissues, and this results in the ulcer. Why venous ulcer is predisposed only in some group of patients? This may be because of a mutation. This is the C2A2Y mutation. Those people who have this mutation, which is a mutation in the relation to iron processing, there is a 7-fold higher risk of developing ulcer. So, as we saw earlier, there is a skin hypoxia that occurs in the gaiter areas. If you see TCPO2, transcutaneous pressure of oxygen, it differs by 20 millimeter in those areas. And also seen are the inflammatory cells which are seen in biopsy. To management, the compression stocking, strategically, most common therapy used for CVI is compression stockings. So the compression stockings to reduce the transmural venous pressure in a graded fashion. The highest compression should be provided in the ankle area and diminishing pressure proximally. In a C classification, C2 to C4 should be 20 to 30 millimeter mercury, and the pressure provided by the compression stockings should be. And in C5 to C6, it should be 40 to 50. In our ideal stocking, the ideal stocking should be the compression pressure should be in the range of 80 to 90 while standing, 50 to 60 while sitting, and 0 in the recumbent position. But this is not possible. And the amount of pressure in the stocking depends on the elastic tension in the garment and the radius of the limb. Limb elevation also plays a role in the management, and it is because of the decreased venous pressure. When there is a limb elevation, the hydrostatic component due to gravity is reduced, and there is resorption of the edema, and ambulatory venous hypertension is not there. So this is a separate condition, iliocaval venous occlusion. This presents as a chronic venous insufficiency with collaterals in the limbs and in the abdominal regions, and the patient also has edema, skin changes, eczema, and sometimes ulcer also. And one component of this May-Turner syndrome is because of the compression of the common iliac vein by the common iliac artery, and the other type is the pelvic congestion syndrome, which is because of the compression of iliac vein and the ovarian veins, and the reflex inside them. And nutcracker syndrome is because of the compression of left renal vein by the superior mesenteric artery. So, conclusion: hemodynamics seems remote from the clinical management from outside, but actually forms the basis of rational approach to diagnosis, treatment, and follow-up of vascular disease. So, this is an exciting time to study the venous thrombogenesis and the pathophysiology of the resulting vein wall damage, because compared to arterial disease. Thank you, sir.